The Decay of Lying and Observation by Oscar Wilde. A dialogue. Persons Cyril and Vivian. See in the library of a country house in Nottinghamshire. Cyril, coming in through the open window from the terrace. My dear Vivian, don't coop yourself up all day in the library. It is a perfectly lovely afternoon. The air is exquisite. There is a mist upon the woods like the purple bloom upon a plum. Let us go and lie on the grass and smoke cigarettes and enjoy nature. Enjoy nature? I am glad to say that I have entirely lost that faculty. People tell us that art makes us love nature more than we loved her before, that it reveals her secrets to us, and that after a careful study of Corot and Constable, we see things in her that had escaped our observation. My own experience is that the more we really study art, the less we care for nature. What art really reveals to us is nature's lack of design, her curious crudities, her extraordinary monotony, her absolutely unfinished condition. Nature has good intentions, of course, but as Aristotle once said, she cannot carry them out. When I look at a landscape, I cannot help seeing all its defects. It is fortunate for us, however, that nature is so imperfect, as otherwise we should have no art at all. Art is our spirited protest, our gallant attempt to teach nature her proper place. As for the infinite variety of nature, that is a pure myth. It is not to be found in nature herself. It resides in the imagination, or fancy, or cultivated blindness of the man who looks at her. Well, you need not look at the landscape. You can lie on the grass and smoke and talk. But nature is so uncomfortable. Grass is hard and lumpy and damp and full of dreadful black insects. Why, even Morris's poorest workman could make you a more comfortable seat than the whole of nature can. Nature pales before the furniture of the street, from which Oxford has borrowed its name, as the poet you love so much once vilely phrased it. I don't complain. If nature had been comfortable, mankind would never have invented architecture, and I prefer houses to the open air. In a house we all feel of the proper proportions. Everything is subordinated to us, fashioned for our use and our pleasure. Egotism itself, which is so necessary to a proper sense of human dignity, is entirely the result of indoor life. Out of doors, one becomes abstract and impersonal. One's individuality absolutely leaves one. And then nature is so indifferent, so unappreciative. Whenever I am walking in the park here, I always feel that I am no more to her than the cattle that browse on the slope or the burdock that blooms in the ditch. Nothing is more evident than that nature hates mind. Thinking is the most unhealthy thing in the world, and people die of it just as they die of any other disease. Fortunately, in England, at any rate, thought is not catching. Our splendid physique as a people is entirely due to our national stupidity. I only hope we shall be able to keep this great historic bulwark of our happiness for many years to come, but I am afraid that we are beginning to be overeducated. At least everybody who is incapable of learning has taken to teaching. That is really what our enthusiasm for education has come to. In the meantime, you had better get back to your wearisome, uncomfortable nature, and leave me to correct my proofs. Writing an article. That is not very consistent after what you have just said. Who wants to be consistent? The dullard and the doctrinaire, the tedious people who carry out their principles to the bitter end of action, to the reductio ad absurdum of practice. Not I. Like Emerson, I write over the door of my library the word whim. Besides, my article is really a most salutary and valuable warning. If it is attended to, there may be a new renaissance of art. What is the subject? I intend to call it The Decay of Lying, a Protest. Lying. I should have thought that our politicians kept up that habit. I assure you they do not. They never rise beyond the level of misrepresentation, and actually condescend to prove, to discuss, to argue. How different from the temper of the true liar, with his frank, fearless statements, his superb irresponsibility, his healthy, natural disdain of proof of any kind. After all, what is a fine lie? Simply that which is its own evidence. If a man is sufficiently unimaginative to produce evidence in support of a lie, he might just as well speak the truth at once. No, politicians won't do. Something may perhaps be urged on behalf of the bar. The mantle of the sophist has fallen on its members. Their feigned ardors and unreal rhetoric are delightful. They can make the worse appear the better, cause as they were fresh from Leontine schools, and have been known to wrest from reluctant juries triumphant verdicts of acquittal for their clients, even when those clients, as often happens, were clearly and unmistakably innocent. But they are briefed by the prosaic, and are not ashamed to appeal to precedent. In spite of their endeavors, the truth will out. Newspapers even have degenerated. They may now be absolutely relied upon. One feels that as one wades through their columns, it is always the unreadable that occurs. I am afraid that there is not much to be said in favor of either the lawyer or the journalist. Besides, what am I pleading for is lying in art. Shall I read you what I have written? It might do you a great deal of good.
Certainly, if you will give me a cigarette. Thanks. By the way, what magazine do you intend it for?
For the retrospective review, I think I told you that the elect had revived it.
Whom do you mean by the elect?
Oh, the tired hedonists, of course. It is a club to which I belong. We are supposed to wear faded roses in our buttonholes when we meet, and to have a sort of cult for Domitian. I'm afraid you are not eligible. You are too fond of simple pleasures.
I should be blackballed on the ground of animal spirits, I suppose.
Probably. Besides, you're a little too old. We don't admit anyone who is of the usual age.
Well, I should fancy you are all a good deal bored with each other.
We are. That is one of the objects of the club. Now, if you promise not to interrupt too often, I will read you my article.
You will find me all attention.
The Decay of Lying, a Protest. One of the chief causes that can be assigned for the curiously commonplace character of most of the literature of our age is undoubtedly the decay of lying as an art, a science, and a social pleasure. The ancient historians gave us delightful fiction in the form of fact. The modern novelist presents us with dull facts under the guise of fiction. The Blue Book is rapidly becoming his ideal both for method and manner. He has his tedious document humane, his miserable little coin de la création, into which he peers with his microscope. He is to be found at the Librairie Nationale or at the British Museum, shamelessly reading up on his subject. He has not even the courage of other people's ideas, but insists on going directly to life for everything. And ultimately, between encyclopedias and personal experience, he comes to the ground, having drawn his types from the family circle or from the weekly washerwoman, and having acquired an amount of useful information from which never even in his most meditative moments can he thoroughly free himself. The loss that results to literature, in general, from this false ideal of our time can hardly be overestimated. People have a careless way of talking about a born liar, just as they talk about a born poet, but in both cases they are wrong. Lying and poetry are arts, as Plato saw, not unconnected with each other, and they require the most careful study, the most disinterested devotion. Indeed, they have their technique, just as the more material arts of painting and sculpture have their subtle secrets of form and color, their craft mysteries. their deliberate, artistic methods. As one knows the poet by his fine music, so one can recognize the lyre by his rich rhythmic utterance. And in neither case will the casual inspiration of the moment suffice. Here, as elsewhere, practice must precede perfection. But in modern days, while the fashion of writing poetry has become far too often, and should if possible be discouraged, the fashion of lying has almost fallen into disrepute. Many a young man starts in life with a natural gift for exaggeration, which, if nurtured in congenial and sympathetic surroundings, or by the imitation of the best models, might grow into something really great and wonderful. But as a rule, he comes to nothing. He either falls into careless habits of accuracy.
My dear fellow.
Please don't interrupt in the middle of a sentence. He either falls into careless habits of accuracy or takes to frequenting the society of the aged and the well-informed. Both things are equally fatal to his imagination, and indeed they would be fatal to the imagination of anybody. And in a short time he develops a morbid and unhealthy faculty of truth-telling, begins to verify all statements made in his presence, has no hesitation in contradicting people who are much younger than himself, and often ends by writing novels which are so lifelike that no one can possibly believe in their probability. This is no isolated instance that we are giving. It is simply one example out of many, and if something cannot be done to check or at least to modify our monstrous worship of facts, art will become sterile and beauty will pass away from the land. Even Mr. Robert Louis Stevenson, the delightful master of delicate and fanciful prose, is tainted with this modern vice, for we know positively no other name for it. There is such a thing as robbing a story of its reality by trying to make it too true, and the Black Arrow is so inartistic as not to contain a single anachronism to boast of, while the transformation of Dr. Jekyll reads dangerously like an experiment out of the Lancet. As for Mr. Rider Haggard, who really has or had once the makings of a perfectly malignant liar, he is now so afraid of being suspected of genius that when he does tell us anything marvelous, he feels bound to invent a personal reminiscence, and to put it into a footnote as a kind of cowardly corroboration. Nor are our other novelists much better. Mr. Henry James writes fiction as if it were a painful duty, and wastes upon mean motives and imperceptible points of view his neat literary style, his felicitous phrases, his swift and caustic satire. Mr. Hall Caine, it is true, aims at the grandiose, but then he writes at the top of his voice. He is so loud that one cannot hear what he says. Mr. James Payn is adept in the art of concealing what is not worth finding. He hunts down the obvious with the enthusiasm of a short-sighted detective. As one turns over the pages, the suspense of the author becomes almost unbearable. The horses of Mr. William Black's phaeton do not soar toward the sun. They merely frighten the sky at evening into violent chromolithographic effects. On seeing them approach, the peasants take refuge in dialect. Mrs. Oliphant prattles pleasantly about curates, lawn tennis parties, domesticity, and other wearisome things. Mr. Marion Crawford has immolated himself upon the altar of local color. He is like the lady in the French comedy who keeps talking about le beau ciel d'Italie. Besides, he has fallen into the bad habit of uttering moral platitudes. He is always telling us that to be good is to be good, and that to be bad is to be wicked. At times he is almost edifying. Robert Elsmere is of course a masterpiece of the genre ennuyeux, the one form of literature that the English people seems thoroughly to enjoy. A thoughtful young friend of ours once told us that it reminded him of the sort of conversation that goes on at a meat tea in the house of a serious nonconformist family, and we can quite believe it. Indeed, it is only in England that such a book could be produced. England is the home of lost ideas. As for the great and daily increasing school of novelists, for whom the sun always rises in the East End, the only thing that can be said about them is that they find life crude and leave it raw.